The skies above Germany in December 1944 belonged to hunters. A single American P-51 Mustang drifted away from its group, smoke pouring from its engine. 4 German Messerschmitt fighters circled above like predators closing in on wounded prey. The pilot's fellow flyers radioed back that he was done for, but what nobody saw was the smoke suddenly stopping, the engine smoothing out, and the hunted becoming the hunter. Within 2 minutes, those German planes would be tumbling from the sky, and one man would quietly transform everything pilots knew about fighting in the air. That winter was the coldest Europe had experienced in generations. Ice-coated cockpit glass at 20,000 feet. A pilot's breath turned to frost before it left his lips. Gun mechanisms seized up as metal shrank in the freezing temperatures. This was the season when Germany's Air Force made its desperate final stand, throwing every experienced pilot they had left into the frozen airspace between 2 great rivers. American heavy bombers fell by the dozens. Fighter escorts pushed their fuel tanks to absolute limits, weaving protective patterns around the slow, vulnerable bombers. Every flight was a calculation. Distance plus bullets plus height equaled either coming home or vanishing forever. Nothing in between existed. The 357th Fighter Group flew out of a soggy airstrip on the English coast. Their Mustangs sat in protective bunkers lined with sandbags, their metal bodies slick with morning frost. Ground crews worked through dark hours with frozen fingers, tightening bolts and patching bullet holes. The air smelled of airplane fuel, gunpowder, and damp clothing. Pilots gathered around a small stove in their waiting area. Maps covered the plywood walls. Intelligence officers delivered brief, clipped updates. The destinations were deep inside enemy territory. The opposition consisted of skilled veterans. Staying alive meant following rules, keeping formation, and avoiding reckless decisions. Captain Robert M. Wilcox sat at the back, 23 years old with a lean face, keen eyes, and the hands of someone who worked with machinery. He listened but rarely spoke. His flight record showed 37 missions with no confirmed enemy planes shot down. This wasn't because he couldn't aim. He simply almost never pulled the trigger. He observed. He analyzed. This made him dangerous in ways nobody yet recognized. His fellow pilots nicknamed him Lucky because he'd never been hit. Not even once. In a conflict where fragile aluminum and human bodies met high-speed bullets every day, that kind of fortune raised eyebrows. Some suspected he hung back from fights. Others figured he was just overly careful. A handful wondered if he was working through some problem in his mind, some formula the rest of them hadn't figured out yet. The briefing for December 12th covered a synthetic fuel factory near a major German city. Enemy fighter presence was expected to be heavy. Anticipated casualties were described as acceptable. That word did heavy lifting during wartime. They launched before dawn, engines spitting blue fire. 48 Mustangs gathered over the water, then banked east toward the pale morning sun. Below, French farmland lay white and still. Above, engine trails stretched across the frozen sky like chalk marks on a dark board. Wilcox flew near the back of the formation. His wingman was a lieutenant from the Midwest, 20 years old, equally eager and afraid. The day before, Wilcox had told him to stay close and watch where the sun was. The young man nodded. Wilcox said nothing more. Words meant little at high altitude. The bombers appeared as a dark blur on the horizon. 200 heavy bombers stacked in defensive groupings, their exhaust trails weaving together across the sky. The fighters slid into escort positions, weaving patterns above and behind. Radio talk was sparse. Eyes swept the empty blue, hunting for the glint of cockpit glass, the tiny dot that grew into danger. The German fighters struck over the river. They dove from the sun, as always. A mix of 2 different fighter types. 30 or more aircraft splitting into attack groups. The radio exploded with shouts. Enemy above, enemy behind. Turn right, turn left. The neat formation shattered into individual battles. Each one was a geometry problem solved in heartbeats or not solved at all. Wilcox watched a German fighter dive past him, close enough to see the enemy pilot's head turning. He didn't pursue. Instead, he climbed higher, gaining altitude, observing the chaos below. His wingman followed, uncertain but trusting. The battle lasted 4 minutes. 2 American fighters went down. 1 heavy bomber dropped from formation with burning engines. The German fighters broke away and dove east, regrouping to the north. The American formation pulled back together, smaller now, hurt but still functioning. Wilcox hadn't fired a single round. That evening, back at base, the review session was tense. Pilots slumped in chairs, drained, mentally replaying every second. Claims were submitted. Gun camera film was examined. Wilcox sat quietly. His report was a single short paragraph. No contact, no ammunition used. His commander glanced at him but stayed silent. In the sleeping quarters, someone muttered that Lucky Wilcox was suspiciously fortunate. He didn't respond. He was drawing in a notebook. Diagrams, angles, speed ranges, the mathematics of hunting. Robert Wilcox grew up in a small Illinois town. His father operated a machine shop. His mother gave piano lessons. Their home smelled of industrial lubricant and musical scores. He was the middle child, quiet and watchful, the type of boy who dismantled timepieces just to understand their inner workings. He avoided athletics. He read technical publications. At 16, he constructed a miniature testing chamber in the family garage using a salvaged motor and lightweight wooden models. His father watched him analyze wing shapes for hours, adjusting angles, recording performance numbers on gridded paper. When asked what it was for, the boy said he wasn't sure yet. Just curiosity. He enrolled at a state university in 1939, studying mechanical engineering. He joined an aviation club, not for the romance of flight, but for practical reasons. Flying was applied physics. He wanted to see if the calculations matched the actual experience. They mostly did. When war came, he enlisted in the military aviation branch. He didn't wait to be drafted. He told his mother it was logical. The nation needed pilots. He had the right abilities. She asked if he felt afraid. He said fear was a variable, not a fixed thing. Initial training happened in a southern state. He flew alone after just 7 hours of instruction. His teachers noted his precision but also his lack of fighting spirit. He flew with mechanical smoothness, never pushing aircraft beyond calculated boundaries. During practice combat, he scored well at shooting but rarely engaged enthusiastically in mock battles. He preferred watching, noting what succeeded and what failed. One trainer wrote in his file that he was technically skilled, but lacked the instinct to kill. Another noted he thought too much and might freeze under actual fire. Wilcox graduated in the middle of his group. He requested fighter assignment rather than bombers. They sent him to train on the Mustang in the western states, then shipped him to England in summer 1944. His first real missions were uneventful. He flew protection. He maintained formation. He came back with full ammunition more often than not. Other pilots accumulated victories. Wilcox accumulated flight time. He wasn't scared. He was calculating. Every fight he witnessed, he recorded. He noted height, velocity, sun position, attack angles, energy levels. He studied how German pilots operated, how they used climbing maneuvers to preserve momentum, how they disengaged when fuel ran low and dove eastward toward safety. He identified patterns. Most fighter pilots thought in terms of individual contests, one-on-one tests of skill and courage. Wilcox thought in terms of systems, energy management, spatial geometry, decision pathways. He believed the ideal engagement was one your opponent didn't realize he was losing until it was finished. His wingman once asked why he rarely fired. Wilcox said he was waiting for certainty. The young man didn't grasp the meaning. Wilcox didn't elaborate. In his notebook, he sketched situations. When outnumbered, don't fight evenly. When you can't outclimb them, don't attempt it. When they expect you to flee, don't. And when they believe you're damaged, let them keep believing. He underlined that final point twice. By December 1944, the air war over Germany had become a grinding contest of endurance. German forces were losing veteran pilots faster than new ones could be trained. But those remaining were experienced. Men with countless missions. Men who knew their machines as well as their own pulse. The challenge for Allied fighters was numerical. German interceptors struck in waves. They no longer engaged in traditional fighting. They slashed through bomber formations, fired, and dove away before escorts could respond. Quick strikes, it was effective. Bomber losses mounted. Standing orders were clear. Stay with the bombers, don't pursue. Your purpose is protection, not personal glory. But doctrine couldn't account for situations where the enemy had more aircraft than you had bullets. The 357th lost 3 pilots in 7 days. 2 more returned with aircraft so badly shot up they were scrapped for parts. Morale grew brittle. The math was harsh. If losses continued at this rate, none of them would complete their required missions. Squadron leaders pushed for bolder approaches. Intercept farther out. Break formation earlier. Engage before Germans reached the bombers. But that spread escorts thin. It created openings. Openings killed people. Wilcox saw the problem differently. The issue wasn't aggression. It was predictability. German command knew what American escorts would do because escorts always did the same things. Formation, discipline, defensive patterns. All reasonable tactics, all anticipated. He started testing something new. During a mission near a major German city, he separated slightly from formation during an attack. Not far, just enough. He reduced throttle, let his Mustang drift lower and slower, appearing damaged. His wingman called out in alarm. Wilcox clicked his radio twice. Hold. 2 German fighters spotted him. They broke away, diving in for an easy kill. A crippled American. Simple prey. They closed to 400 yards. 300. Wilcox remained still. 200 yards. They opened fire. Tracer rounds arced past his wings. Then he moved. Full power. Sharp left turn. Pulling tremendous force against his body. The Mustang snapped around, speed flooding back into the airframe. The Germans overshot, their approach speed too high to adjust. Wilcox rolled upside down, pulled through, and positioned himself behind the trailing enemy. 1 burst, 2 seconds. The German's cockpit shattered. The plane rolled left and fell away, trailing smoke. The second German broke hard, trying to climb out. Wilcox didn't follow. He pushed downward, accelerated, and extended away. The German climbed alone, confused. By the time he leveled out, Wilcox was already gone. No extended dogfight, no fuel-wasted circling. Just physics, bait, trap, result. His wingman was silent during the return flight. At debriefing, Wilcox submitted his claim. 1 destroyed. Gun camera footage confirmed it. His commander asked what had happened. Wilcox said he'd used an energy advantage. The commander nodded slowly. He didn't probe further, but other pilots heard about it. The quiet one who played dead and scored a kill. Some thought it was clever, others thought it was reckless. One senior pilot called it a stunt. Wilcox didn't argue. He simply wrote in his notebook. First test successful. He ran the experiment again 3 days later. Same setup, different outcome. The German didn't take the bait. He circled high, cautious. Wilcox canceled the attempt and returned to formation. No harm done. But now he understood. The tactic worked against aggression, not caution. He refined his approach. You couldn't fake damage too early. You couldn't fake it too obviously. It had to appear genuine. Engine smoke, shallow descent, unsteady handling. Just enough to trigger hunting instinct without raising suspicion. And you needed a wingman who understood that silence meant trust, not emergency. He approached his squadron commander. He said he wanted to attempt something unusual on the next deep penetration mission. Something unconventional. The commander was doubtful. Wilcox walked him through the reasoning. Energy states, overshoot mechanics, psychological advantage. The commander listened. Finally, he said Wilcox got 1 opportunity. If it failed, standard procedures would apply afterward. Wilcox agreed. He didn't mention he'd already tested it twice. He didn't mention the mathematics said it should work every time against the right opponent. He simply said he understood. December 19th. The objective was a rail yard deep in Germany, packed with supply trains heading to the front lines. Weather was marginal. Low cloud cover, ice building on wing edges. The mission nearly scrubbed, but bombers launched anyway. Fighters followed. Wilcox briefed his wingman before departure. He explained what to expect. If he called for the wingman to trail, the young pilot should drop back and climb high. Don't follow down. Just observe and cover. The lieutenant asked what the plan was. Wilcox called it an experiment. The journey east was rough. Turbulence shook the formation. Visibility dropped. They crossed into enemy airspace beneath gray cloud layers. The ground below was a smear of white and shadow. The bombers reached their target. Anti-aircraft fire rose in dark bursts, staining the sky. The heavy bombers held steady. Bomb doors opened wide. Then enemy fighters appeared. A full formation. 30 aircraft. He spotted 4 German fighters rolling in toward a straggling bomber. He didn't go for the leader. He targeted the second pair. Then he did something nobody expected. He cut power. The Mustang slowed. He dropped the nose slightly, skidding left in uncoordinated flight. He activated a smoke generator he'd improvised the night before from an engine oil line. White vapor streamed from his engine cowling. Over the radio, his wingman called it in. Lead is hit. Lead is trailing smoke. The 2 German fighters noticed. They abandoned their run on the bomber and turned toward the American. Easier target. The Mustang was low, slow, damaged. They dove in. 1 high, 1 low. Textbook attack positioning. Wilcox counted to 3. Then he killed the smoke, slammed the throttle forward, and pulled hard into the diving German. The Mustang's speed jumped 40 knots in 2 seconds. The turn tightened. The German realized his mistake too late. He tried to pull away. He couldn't. Wilcox was already inside his turning radius. 1 short burst. 30 rounds. The German's wing root disintegrated. The aircraft flipped upside down and spun into the clouds. The second German overshot, moving too fast to correct. He attempted a climbing escape. Wilcox rolled, pulled vertical, and met him at the highest point of his climb. Another burst. The cockpit exploded. The German tumbled backward, missing a wing. Total elapsed time. 40 seconds. Wilcox's wingman was shouting. He got 2. He got both of them. But Wilcox wasn't finished. He spotted another group of German fighters circling to the east, reforming. They hadn't seen him yet. He climbed toward the sun, throttle wide open, altitude building. His wingman followed, quiet now, understanding the rhythm. Wilcox executed the trick again, but added a variation. This time he didn't just fake damage, he faked panic. He broke away from his wingman, diving erratically as if he'd lost awareness of his surroundings. The Germans noticed. A separated, disoriented American. 3 of them broke off to pursue. They closed rapidly. Wilcox let them. He was measuring their speed, their angle, their commitment. When they reached 400 yards distance, he pulled into a climbing spiral. Engine screaming. The lead German followed. The other 2 attempted to cut him off. Wilcox rolled out at the top, inverted, and dove straight back through them. Head on. It appeared insane. It was also geometry. He fired. The lead German exploded. He didn't pull up. He continued diving, threading between the other 2 aircraft. They scattered, surprised, reflexes overriding training. One broke left. The other broke right. Wilcox chopped throttle, extended wing flaps, and whipped the Mustang around in a turn so severe his vision faded gray. He aimed ahead of the left-hand German and fired. The rounds connected. The German rolled over, leaking fuel. The final enemy ran. Wilcox didn't pursue. He retracted flaps, checked his fuel gauge, and climbed back to altitude. His wingman rejoined, breathing hard over the radio. 4 destroyed. 2 minutes, maybe less. The bomber's stream was pulling away intact. The remaining German fighters were scattered, low on fuel, heading home. Wilcox slid back into the escort formation as though nothing unusual had occurred. No one on the radio spoke. At the evening review, gun camera footage played in silence. The intelligence officer counted the kills, confirmed them. 4 destroyed. The squadron commander watched without expression. When the film ended, he asked if anyone else had tried this approach. No one answered. He looked at Wilcox. Write it up. Procedures. Setup. Execution. I want it typed and on my desk tomorrow. Wilcox nodded. The document ran 3 typed pages with included diagrams. He titled it something about exploiting enemy aggression in air combat. He presented the concept systematically. German veteran pilots were aggressive but not careless. They attacked damaged or isolated aircraft because it was efficient. Low risk with high reward. But that aggression created a predictable response pattern. If you could convincingly fake the appearance of damage, you reversed the engagement. The hunter became the hunted. Enemy pilots committed to attack profiles assuming vulnerability. But vulnerability wasn't real. You used their closing speed and focused attention against them. The critical variables were altitude, speed difference, and timing. You had to bait them at exactly the right energy level. Too high and they wouldn't commit. Too low and you couldn't recover. The margin was narrow but consistent. He included performance data, Mustang acceleration curves, turn radius versus velocity, overshoot geometry. He referenced practice sessions he'd conducted over the base using friendly aircraft as simulated attackers. He didn't mention building the smoke generator himself from spare components. He didn't mention testing it alone at night so nobody would ask questions. The squadron commander read the document twice. Then he walked it to group headquarters. The group commander read it. He called in his operations officer. They spread the diagrams on a table and analyzed each step. The operations officer said it was too risky. If the deception failed, you ended up slow, low, and isolated. Dead. The group commander asked how many times Wilcox had used the technique. 6 times. 6 kills. No damage received. The operations officer fell silent. The group commander decided to train 2 additional pilots. Volunteers only. They would test it on the next deep mission under controlled conditions. If it succeeded, they'd expand training. If it failed, they'd abandon it. 3 days later, 2 captains sat in a briefing room with Wilcox. He walked them through the method. Not just the mechanics, but the psychology. You had to sell it. If your acting was unconvincing, they'd recognize the deception. You had to commit to the role. Damaged aircraft didn't fly smoothly. They drifted. They wallowed. They appeared panicked. One captain asked what happened if the enemy didn't take the bait. Wilcox said then either you failed to sell it or they were out of fuel. Either way, you canceled and rejoined formation. No loss. The other captain asked what if the enemy was smarter than expected. Wilcox said then you were in an even fight and used standard tactics. But most of the time opponents weren't thinking clearly. They were reacting. Reaction was predictable. They practiced over open water. Mock engagements. One Mustang played bait while others acted as aggressors. The first captain needed 4 attempts before timing clicked. The second captain was smoother. By the 6th practice run, both executed cleanly. December 23rd. They flew the mission. Target was an enemy airfield in southern Germany. Heavy opposition expected. German forces were defending their remaining bases with everything left. Intelligence warned not to expect the enemy to retreat. They would fight over home territory. The strike force crossed mountain ranges. Snow-covered peaks gleamed below. Bombers struggled through thin air, engines laboring. Fighters wove above, scanning the sky. Germans rose to meet them in force. 30 fighters. Maybe 40. They struck the formation head-on in a massed assault designed to break the escorts and scatter the bombers. Wilcox's flight was on the southern edge. He spotted a group of German fighters climbing toward them. He radioed the 2 trained captains. Execute. All 3 Mustangs broke formation. They dove, trailing smoke, appearing wounded and disoriented. The Germans saw easy kills. They rolled in to attack. It was a massacre. The 3 American fighters whipped around in sequence, energy flooding back into their frames. The committed Germans, moving too fast, overshot into firing positions they hadn't anticipated. Wilcox claimed 2. The first captain claimed 1. The second captain claimed 2. Total elapsed time, 90 seconds. The remaining German fighters broke off, confused, scattering in all directions. The bomber formation held. Not a single heavy bomber was lost to fighters that day. At debriefing, the group commander listened to reports. He watched gun camera footage. When it finished, he said training would begin for the entire group starting the next day. Within a week, every pilot in the 357 had received instruction on the technique. Some attempted it, some didn't. But those who tried started recording kill rates the group hadn't seen since summer. The method spread. Other groups heard about it. Flight leaders visited the base, attended briefings, took notes. By the new year, the approach was being used across the entire American fighter force in Europe. German forces noticed. Their intelligence officers questioned surviving pilots who described Americans faking damage, then striking. Warnings were issued. Do not engage apparently wounded aircraft without caution. Confirm damage before committing. But in actual combat, caution was slow, and slow was fatal. The tactic continued working. Wilcox flew 16 more missions. He claimed 9 additional kills using variations of his technique. He never lost a wingman. He never sustained serious damage. Other pilots called him the professor now. He didn't mind. In his notebook, he wrote that predators hesitate when prey stops behaving like prey. Hesitation is a form of death. The measurable results were undeniable. In December 1944, the 357th Fighter Group's ratio of enemy kills to own losses jumped from 3-to-1 to 7-to-1. Bomber casualties on missions with trained decoy escorts dropped by 40%. The data was compiled, analyzed, and forwarded to higher headquarters. In the new year, a training document was distributed across all fighter groups. It was titled something about tactical deception in aerial combat. It didn't mention Wilcox by name, but every pilot who read it understood where it originated. The technique was refined further. Pilots developed variations. Some used terrain, diving toward cloud layers and pulling up at the final moment. Others used teamwork, one aircraft baiting while partners positioned above. The core principle remained constant. Exploit aggression through deception. German forces adapted slowly. By late winter, enemy pilots became more cautious. But caution cost them momentum. And by that point in the war, Germany's Air Force had no momentum to spare. Wilcox's final count was 13 confirmed kills, all but 1 achieved using the approach he'd developed. He never named it himself. Other pilots called it playing dead or the wounded bird trick. Official reports listed it as energy deception maneuvering. He completed his combat assignment in early spring 1945. He was offered promotion and a position training others. He declined. He said he wanted to return home and finish his education. His group commander didn't argue. Before departure, a young lieutenant asked how he'd conceived the idea. Wilcox said he hadn't invented anything. He'd simply observed what worked and what didn't, then tested a theory. The lieutenant asked if he'd ever been afraid it wouldn't work. Wilcox said every single time. But fear didn't alter the mathematics. Either the physics was sound or it wasn't. After the war, analysts at military tactical centers studied the 357th's records. They noted the anomaly, a single pilot's contribution that rippled across an entire combat theater. They classified the reports, filed them, and moved on. There were 1,000 similar stories. Most were forgotten, but the pilots who flew alongside Wilcox remembered. At gatherings decades later, they told the story of the man who transformed hunters into hunted. They described those 2 minutes over Germany when the sky turned violent and the calculations held. One veteran interviewed in 1982 said the man didn't look like a warrior. He looked like someone who balanced books for a living. But he grasped something the rest of them missed. Combat was just physics with consequences. Robert Wilcox returned to his home state in spring 1945. He completed his engineering degree. He married a woman he met in a university library. He worked for a heavy equipment manufacturer designing hydraulic systems. He raised 3 children. He rarely discussed the war. In the 1970s, a researcher contacted him while writing a history of his fighter group. Wilcox agreed to speak. He answered questions carefully, precisely, with the same methodical clarity he'd brought to combat. The researcher asked if he considered himself a hero. Wilcox said no. He was a pilot who paid attention. The researcher asked what the war had taught him. Wilcox paused. Then he said, "The most dangerous enemy is predictability, yours or theirs. And survival isn't about being fearless. It's about staying rational when rationality is difficult." The interview appeared in a small aviation publication. Few people read it. Wilcox died in 1991 at 70 years old. His obituary mentioned his engineering career and his wartime service. It didn't mention the kills. It didn't mention the tactical innovation that transformed how an entire Air Force fought. His flight logs and notebooks were donated to a military museum. They sit in a climate-controlled storage facility in the Midwest. Researchers occasionally request access. The diagrams remain clear. The handwriting remains neat. The logic remains sound. In modern air combat training programs, energy deception is taught as a fundamental concept. Instructors don't always know its origin. They just know it works. Because a quiet engineer from a small Midwestern town demonstrated that wars aren't won by the loudest or boldest. They're won by those who recognize patterns, test theories, and act when calculations are certain. He didn't alter the war through speeches or dramatic gestures. He changed it with a notebook, a timing device, and the willingness to appear weak when strength was the only accepted currency. His fellow pilots thought he was finished. The enemy thought he was easy prey. Both were wrong. And in 2 minutes over Germany, a handful of experienced pilots learned the hardest lesson air warfare had to teach. The most dangerous opponent is the one who makes you believe you've already won.